Okay, now we are on chapter 3 of the history syllabus for ICSE class 10. I hope you have seen the first two parts, the growth of nationalism, and before that, the first war of independence. This one is the first phase of the Indian national movement. So now, I hope kahani samajh mein aa rahi hai. You are understanding the story, the way it is flowing, right? So the formation of the Indian National Congress was discussed in the last video, in the last chapter, and now we are getting into the first phase of the Indian national movement. Now, this phase was essentially dominated by the moderates. Now, who are the moderates? The early nationalists were called the moderates, and I will tell you exactly what's the reason why they were called the moderates. But before that, you need to understand the three phases of the Indian national movement. I put it in the colors of the national flag, right? The first phase is the early nationalist phase, which was known as the moderate phase. The moderate phase is because those leaders who were at the forefront of the freedom struggle at that time were essentially not people who believed in violence, not people who believed in too much of confrontation, but they believed in petitions, in prayers, in essentially submitting memorandum and requesting the British government for some kind of concessions and reforms. This phase lasted from 1885, when the Indian National Congress was formed, till about 1907. Okay, that is the first phase, the nationalist phase. The second phase is the assertive phase. Now, what is assertive? Assertive, as the word itself kind of conveys, is a thing where the leaders and India in general is asserting herself ki humko freedom chahiye. We want freedom. So there is a sense of demanding. Earlier, the tone was that of requesting, right? Now the tone is that of demanding, and this assertive phase lasted from 1907 till about 1916, right? And the third phase is the Gandhian era, which starts with 1915 and goes on till 1947, coinciding with Mahatma Gandhi's arrival in India and till India's independence. January 9th, 1915 is when Mahatma Gandhi returned permanently from South Africa, right? So 1915, this of course overlaps a little, and Mahatma Gandhi's Gandhian era, if you see, is kind of a combination of this and this. And why do I say that? It is assertive because he was very adamant that nothing less than independence would do, right? So in that sense, he was assertive. At the same time, he did not believe in violence. So in that sense, he had borrowed something from the moderate phase also. So in that sense, he was a combination of moderate and assertive, with probably more assertive, but quite a bit of the elements of the moderate phase also. So I hope these three phases are clear. You have understood it. Ratta marne ki zarurat nahi hai. Agar SWS ke saath jude ho, if you are part of SWS, I insist that you should not cram, you should not mug up history. Just understand it like a story. Apne aap, the sponge in your brain will absorb everything. Okay? Masti karo. Now, what is it about the early nationalists? Okay, who are the early nationalists? Now, largely the early nationalists were members of the educated middle class. You know, people, many of them educated in England, many of them who could communicate and articulate in English. They were professionals, they were lawyers and teachers, quite a few of them. So they were also inspired by Western liberal thought, which is why, you know, they kind of were okay with the banning of sati, right? Banning of the dowry system, promoting widow remarriage, you know, more liberal, more forward thinking, more progressive thinking as per the Western kind of thought, right? And they felt, and this is important, that they were not radically against the British. Okay, they had some sense of loyalty to the British crown, and they felt that British wanted to actually provide justice, and they believed in British sense of justice and fair play. Okay, that they wanted to be fair, that they felt that the British wanted to be fair and just, but they did not know the real situation on the ground in India, which is why many of these leaders would go to England and petition them and say that this is the situation back home in India. So they were believers in moderate politics. Okay, what I've already explained to you. They demanded reforms, which is why they were called moderates, and they believed in peaceful methods. So these were, if you are asked about, you know, what were the kind of beliefs of the early nationalists or the moderates, you need to mention all these points that I have written. Notes mein dekh lijiye, sab kuch hai. Okay, this is what it is. This gentleman is Dadabhai Naoroji, about who we will learn more the grand old man of India. This is W.C. Banerjee, first president of the Indian National Congress in December 1885. This gentleman is Gopala Krishna Gokhale, known as the political mentor or guru of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. So the leaders, you need to have written down the list of names you should kind of be familiar with from different parts of India, from Bengal, like W.C. Banerjee, Surendranath Banerjee, Rash Bihari Ghosh, Dadabhai Naoroji and Gopal Krishna Gokhale from the Maharashtra, Gujarat region, western part of Maharashtra, Justice Ranade, whose photograph I'll show, Madan Mohan Malviya from UP, Subramania Iyer, P.R. Naidu, Anand Charlu from South India, and Englishmen like A.O. Hume. So different parts of the country, there were these early nationalists. Now, I've already told you what were the characteristics of the early nationalists. They were called moderates because their methods of struggle were moderate, they were peaceful, they were not violent, and they had faith in the British government, and their demands were for reforms, both constitutional and administrative reforms. Okay. In fact, Dadabhai Naoroji said, "Let us speak out like men and proclaim that we are loyal to the backbone." Basically loyalty to the crown. What I mentioned is something which was part of the entire moderate culture, right? And they hoped that the British would grant home rule to the Indians. Now, what is home rule? Home rule meant dominion status for India under the British Empire. Now, the question is, what is dominion? Dominion means that one is ruled by another body, right? So India will continue to be ruled by the British, but India would have some semblance of self-rule, right? That's what essentially home rule meant. Okay, and they felt that UK would help Indians govern themselves according to Western standards. They were very inspired by Western standards of the way the democracy would function, etc. So they wanted to emulate, they wanted to copy that style of governance. Okay, and they believed in reconciliation, not confrontation, and felt that the association with England was not a curse but a boon, because it helped them remove defects from their own system. What I mentioned about, like sati, widow remarriage, education for the girl child, parda system, dowry system, etc., hereditary priesthood, all that we discussed in the Growth of Nationalism chapter. Now, the other next part which you should know is what were the demands of the early nationalists. This gentleman is Justice M.G. Ranade, with who Gopala Krishna Gokhale was involved. This is A.O. Hume, about who we have read in the previous chapter. This is Surendranath Banerjee, a very important figure. He was a second Indian to be to qualify for the ICSE examination. We will read about him a little while. Now, what were the demands of the early nationalists? They demanded constitutional reforms and economic reforms, right? Now, what were the constitutional reforms that they demanded? They wanted expansion of the legislative council, right? They wanted legislative council and wanted the membership and powers of this legislative council to be increased, and for the members to be elected directly by the peoples, because then they felt that the Indian leaders will get elected, right? Then they demanded Swaraj. They wanted Swaraj to be there. In fact, Dadabhai Naoroji was the first person to demand Swaraj from a Congress platform. Earlier, Swami Dayanand Saraswati had used the term, but Dadabhai Naoroji officially announced it, demanded it from a Congress platform. And they wanted representation for Indians in the executive council of the viceroy and also of the governors in the state. Okay. Then we come to the economic reforms. They wanted reduction in land revenue, jada tax na dena pade. Reduction, they wanted the expenditure on army to be reduced, and they wanted abolition of salt tax and duty on sugar. Salt tax is important. We will read about it when we come to Gopala Krishna Gokhale. Okay. So this is as far as the economic reforms is concerned. Samajh mein aa gaya abhi tak? If you do not pause, understand, just go through it again, so that, because as I said, if you just listen to it a couple of times, you will remember all this. You will not forget. Don't think of it as a boj. Just think of it as a keep on saying, kahani sun rahe ho, kahani sun rahe ho, kahani sun rahe ho, kahani sun rahe ho. Demands of early nationalists. What were the administrative reforms that they were seeking? The administrative reform, this one is very important. They wanted simultaneous ICS exam in London and India. ICS is the present day IAS exam, jo UPSC karata hai, IAS, IPS, IFS, etc. Indian Civil Service, Imperial Civil Service we bolte the, but when it was specific to India, it is called the Indian Civil Service. That they did not want it only in London and in India later on. They wanted it to be held at the same time. they wanted the separation of the executive from the judiciary. ये ना हो कि एक ही आदमी एक province में या एक district में he becomes the lord, he is controlling the law and is controlling the administration also. They did not want that, so they wanted complete separation, and they wanted more development of irrigation, more health facilities for the people, and finally the defense of civil rights. This is important because they opposed restrictions on freedom of press, that press should have the freedom to report whatever they could, and wanted restoration of right to form associations and also assemble, that they can assemble, they can hold sabhas, they can give speeches, they can move resolutions, and they can form an association, because all this was, the British did not allow all this. So they wanted all these rights to be given. So these are the 4 demands of the early nationalists, which can come as a section B question. So please know all this. Now, what were the methods? Beliefs ho gaya, demands ho gaya, now methods of early nationalists. Okay. It was called the constitutional agitation method. Why? Because they believed in going as per law. हम कानून का उल्लंघन नहीं करेंगे, हम कानून के अगेंस्ट नहीं जाएंगे, कानून के अंदर रहते हुए हम एजिटेट करेंगे, which is why it is called a constitutional agitation method. Okay, they criticized government policies, held meetings and passed resolutions. Okay, so that's what they tried to do. They also tried to educate people in modern politics, create public opinion, educate people in modern politics. This was another method of the early nationalists. They criticized government policies, held meetings and passed resolutions. अगर उनको कोई policy पसंद नहीं आए तो उसको criticize किया गया. They were opposed to violence or use of force. So that is not something which they like to do. They made use of the press. They made use of the press in order to criticize the government. They sent petitions to British Parliament and government officials. So all these different things they did. Then there were more. They made use of the 3 P's: petitions, prayers, protest. This is an important question which comes many times in the board examination also. The 3 P's: petition, prayers and protest. They would protest peacefully, they would give a petition, and they would also pray to the Sarkar ki please do this. Okay. Then they the other thing they wanted was, in 1889 they set up the British Committee of the Indian National Congress in London. That was important, and they started coming out with a weekly journal called India to present India's case in Britain, so that people in Britain should be aware of what is the real situation on the ground in India, which people sitting in London may not be aware of. Indian leaders traveled to London to present their case, Dadabhai Naoroji being one of the foremost among them, right? He was known as the unofficial ambassador of India, and Dadabhai Naoroji also got elected in 1892 as the first Indian to become a member of parliament in Britain, of House of Commons, right? Which was quite a credible achievement, though he won by his election by only 5 votes, but he became the first Indian to become a British MP. Okay, so these were all the methods of the early nationalists. Now the question of course arises is, kuch hasil hua? Did the early nationalists achieve anything? Well, they managed to, there is criticism against them, but they managed to create a national awakening, right? कि लोगों में ये एक तरह से एहसास हो गया कि Britain is not entirely right for India in that sense, that we should be able to govern ourselves. And they also managed a resolution in the House of Commons for simultaneous examination for ICS in both London and in India. But generally, unke methods were criticized as inadequate. Inadequate is a key word, because they depended on what? On the generosity of the British. That the British will show some generosity, to fir hamara kaam ho jayega. And also their influence, what I said right in the first slide, their influence was restricted to the urban, educated, middle class people. So the poor people, the uneducated, the illiterate kind of people, they were not very aware and they were not connected to this crowd which was leading the early nationalists or the moderates. Okay, one of their achievements was to get the legislative councils expanded by the Indian Councils Act of 1892. They increased the number of additional members. Members were allowed to discuss the budget and also criticize the policies of the government. Okay, this is not strictly part of syllabus, but you should be aware of what was the reaction. इतना कुछ पढ़ लिया, उसका reaction क्या हुआ इंडिया में, ये तो जानना मांगता है ना, right? So with this we come to the end of the first video on the first phase of the Indian national movement. In the second phase, we will study about 3 people: Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopalakrishna Gokhale and Surendranath Banerjee. So I'll see you now in video part 2. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, I hope you have seen video 1 and now we are on video 2 of the first phase of the Indian national movement. Now, before we get to the 3 people whose life biographies and achievements we need to understand, let's understand the change in the attitude. Remember in the growth of nationalism chapter when we were discussing the formation of the Indian National Congress, I had told you about how Viceroy Dufferin, Lord Dufferin, actually reacted to the formation of the Congress. He said it was an essential safety valve. Remember, that's an important quote. But 2 साल में रिश्ते बिगड़ गए, relations soured, and Lord Dufferin in 1887 thought that Indian National Congress was representing only a microscopic minority. Microscopic minority means it is representing only a very few people, which is in that sense not entirely untrue, because as I said, the moderates were essentially the urban middle class professionals, right? So they were representing a microscopic minority, and British started calling Congress leaders as disloyal babus and violent villains. Okay, not very polite or parliamentary or very nice words to use, but that's what they did. The other thing which happened was Lord Elgin too, who was Viceroy from 1894 to 99. Okay, this guy, before that Lytton, Elgin, and after this Lord Curzon, not really the best of viceroys for India. He said India was conquered by the sword and by the sword it shall be held. You know, कि हम इसको control करके रहेंगे तलवार से. That means by violence we will control India. So this kind of again soured relations between the British government and the Congress party. And then the British also used the policy of divide and rule. The government employees were forbidden from attending meetings of the Congress or joining the Congress in any way, and Muslims were encouraged to oppose the Indian National Congress. This subsequently resulted in the formation of the Muslim League subsequently. Okay, so 1906. So these were the 3 developments which happened vis-a-vis the Congress as far as the British were concerned. Now let's look at the 3 people. Dadabhai Naoroji first, known as the Grand Old Man of India. As I said, the first Indian to become a British MP. Rast Goftar, that is one of the publications that he was involved in. He edited that newspaper. It is called, its meaning is the speaker of truth or truth teller. Okay, speaker of truth or truth teller is the translation of Rast Goftar. He wrote Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. This is an important thing. It has come in the board examination 2019, right? Which was the publication written by Dadabhai Naoroji because he was good with economic affairs. So this is basically about the economic situation in India, and he propounded the drain theory. What is the drain theory? The drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Okay, so these 2 points are important. Then he also protested against the Vernacular Press Act, about which we have already read. He was the Indian National Congress president 3 times. 3 times, you don't need to necessarily remember the name, 1886 being the first one, right? I can tell you the years in which he was the president, 1893 and 1906. 1906 is when he made the demand for Swaraj from a Congress platform. He demanded Swaraj in 1906. And he founded the Bombay Association and London India Society, right? And also, of course, the first one that he was already the precursor to the Indian National Congress. He was a professor of mathematics, incidentally. Incidentally, all these 3 people who we are going to read about, Dadabhai Naoroji, Gokhale, and Surendranath Banerjee, all 3 of them were professors, okay, coming from a teaching profile, teaching background. Okay, so that's as far as Dadabhai Naoroji is concerned. Let's move to Gopalakrishna Gokhale. He was known as the political guru or the political mentor of Mahatma Gandhi. He supported the Minto-Morley reforms. He played a role in the passage, and that has always been a bit of a controversy as to why did Gopalakrishna Gokhale supported it. There were a lot of bad things about the Minto-Morley reforms, especially, you know, separate voting rights, etc., separate assemblies, etc., for the Muslim community. So in that sense, supporting the divide and rule policy, but he did play a role in supporting the Minto-Morley and helping in the passage of the Minto-Morley reforms. This is not part of your syllabus essentially. He opposed the partition of Bengal and he was a member of the Imperial Legislative Council. Okay, now he was a professor of history, by the way. The first one was of mathematics. He was awarded the title of the Companion of the Indian Empire, CIE. He went to England to convey India's views. There was something called the Welby's Commission on Indian Expenditure. So uske samne he presented his views. He was for making primary education compulsory and he argued in favor of reduction in salt duty when he was a member of the Imperial Legislative Council. So if a question comes, who was the Indian who kind of fought for the reduction in salt duty? It is Gopalakrishna Gokhale in 1902. Okay, he set up the Servants of India Society also. Yeah, the Deccan Education Society and the Servants of India Society. The Servants of India Society was to train national leaders. This is important. Because what did Jyotiba Phule form? What did Ram Mohan Roy form? What did Gopalakrishna Gokhale form? All this can come. Okay, the organizations that they set up. So, Servants of Indian Society was to train national leaders to dedicate themselves to the service of the nation. Jahan tak Deccan Education Society ka sawal hai, that was in association with Justice M.G. Ranade, whose photograph I showed you, right? Both of them were together. He's basically from Pune, as it was called then in Maharashtra. Okay, so that is as far as Gopalakrishna Gokhale was concerned. The third one is Surendranath Banerjee, who was a professor of English. Both photographs can come. See, I am showing you the photographs here, unlike some people who just put a lot of text, is because many of the picture questions also come in your examination paper. Both these photographs, this is of a younger Surendranath Banerjee, this one was a little older, right? So both these photographs are generally used in the examination paper. He established the Indian Association and Indian National Conference. This one merged with the Indian National Congress in 1886. I have already discussed that in the previous paper, in the previous chapter videos. He was involved in the editing of Bengali and also wrote Nation in the Making, is a book that he wrote. He was called Indian Burke because he was very influenced by this author called Edmund Burke, however you pronounce it, and that's why he was called the Indian Burke. Subsequently, he was the second Indian to qualify for the ICS examination. Iske piche ek story ye hai, he was appointed in Sylhet in Assam. Subsequently, it went to Bangladesh and there he was fired for some kind of a procedural error. He is known as the father of Indian nationalism. He agitated against the Press Act and the Arms Act and he was knighted. So in that sense, even though he was kind of against the British saw him as a friend and because he became the health minister of Bengal, there was a sense of a discomfort, a sense of suspicion vis-a-vis Surendranath Banerjee among many people, right? He was also subsequently critical of Mahatma Gandhi, right? He died in 1925, but he was also critical of Mahatma Gandhi's and his methods. One of his famous quotes is, opposition where necessary, cooperation where possible. So in that sense, he kept the door open. He was open to cooperating with the British wherever it was possible, right? And he was knighted for his support to the British Empire. Knighted means, being called sir. And his acceptance of this ministership in Bengal made him slightly unpopular. So, he was the first Indian to hold that position of a minister in the government of Bengal. He was elected to Calcutta Corporation and the Bengal Legislative Council. All this is in the notes. So, you need to know all these different aspects of Surendranath Banerjee, Gopalakrishna Gokhale and Dadabhai Naoroji. With this, we come to the end of the first phase of the Indian national movement. I hope it is clear. There are quite a few things which you need to remember, but as I say, you read it a few times, it will get established. Don't try to mug it up, because when you mug it up, uska lifespan kam rehta hai. Okay, you tend to forget it after a few days. So just try to remember it, think of codes in which you can remember it, and everyone will associate with these photographs. That's also something very important. Thank you very much.